Hello, my name is Taina Bien-Aime, and welcome to 28 Minutes, Issues that Matter to New York City and to the World. Today we are having a special 58-minute program and a conversation about suicide and suicide attempts among youth and and how this crisis is disproportionately affecting the Latino community here in New York City and around the world. Latina teens and young women attempt suicide at rates far greater than their non-Latina counterparts, more than twice the rate of white youth in New York City and 44% more than African American teens. To help us understand this devastating trend and what some people call an epidemic, we welcome three experts in the field: Dr. Rosa Gil, founder, president, and CEO for Comunlife; Beatriz Coronel, director of Life is Precious; and Cynthia Santiago, founder of Latina Wellness Network. Ladies, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So this is a devastating statistical reality, 1 in 5 Latinas. Dr. Gil, can you run us through this terrible, this devastating epidemic, as some people call it, like why the Latina community is affected disproportionately by this issue?
Thank you very much for having us here to discuss a very, very important problem in the Latino community. Indeed, the rate of suicide among Latina adolescents is a concern. It has been like this for quite a long time. Actually, since 1995, the Centers for Disease Control show that Latina adolescents have much higher rate of suicide ideation, suicide attempts, than their counterparts in the African American community, the Asian community, and the white community. So this is very troublesome.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain to the viewers what the difference is between suicide ideation and attempts and actual suicide?
Yes, and I think that that's important for those who are watching this television program to understand the differences. It's almost like you start feeling bad about yourself. There may be triggers. You may feel depressed, and you begin to think, gee whiz, life is not worthwhile. And you and I and others, we may have good days and bad days where we feel low, but that doesn't mean that we think that life is not worth it to be lived. So the first thing is thinking, gee whiz, I really will not like to live. I mean, this is awful what's happening to me. Then there's one further step, which is you begin to think, how am I going to do it? And that becomes even a more serious issue. Because when you begin to think, how am I going to do this? Am I going to take pills? Am I going to cut my wrist? Whatever. Then the problem of the seriousness of the ideation is really troublesome. Then there is another step. After one is thinking, one may act on it or not, but then the next step is an attempt. And in the case of Latina adolescents, the attempt suicide is pretty high. And what we know from the researchers that those who attempt suicide, 1, 2, then third time maybe a completed suicide. So we have a whole host of steps in this tragic phenomena that the viewers may need to understand. That one becomes sad, one begins to think about death, one begins to plan about it, then one begins to act on it, and hopefully, regretfully, there will not be a completion.
Mm-hmm. So your colleague, Beatriz, who's director of Life is Precious, so you come across these young Latinas who either are thinking about it or who unfortunately have attempted it. What does your day look like?
So the process is that we get the referral and we get the family to come in, and we have our intake process when we sort of assess the history and what's been going on and assess what the stressors are and what may have triggered these emotions. And then what we do is once that step is over, then they can begin the program. One of the requirements is that they are in treatment. So what we do is that we work closely with the therapists, psychiatrists, to ensure that we're part of the treatment plan. So once we've assessed and done all of that, then they can begin the program. And we have 2 sites, one in the Bronx and one in Brooklyn, because these are where the rates are the highest. In the Bronx, we're there 6 days a week. In Brooklyn, we're there 3 days a week. So it's like a youth development program that focuses on girls who've had suicidal ideations or attempts or suffering from a mood disorder. So we have a creative arts therapy approach with the girls, where the way we address the issue is not directly through verbal as a therapist would do. And what we're finding is that with teenagers, it's hard for them to articulate and verbalize their emotions and what they're feeling. It's easier for them to express their emotions through the arts. So we have a dance movement therapist, a music therapist, and 2 art therapists. And they're the ones that run groups with the girls. And then we have case managers who address the issues and the stresses that are going on directly with the family members. If we don't work with the family members, then when the girls go back to the home, then the issue prevails. So they come to the program. The way that the day runs is that they come in, we kind of settle in, homework. Academics is also a major focus for us. About 50% of our girls have been left back at least once. So academic is something that we address. So we have tutors that work with our girls and do tutoring with them. So that's kind of like the first part. Then we have an art activity. One of the art therapists does an art activity with them, whether it's dance, movement, music, or art. And then the other component that we have is a healthy initiative, which kind of connects and teaches them that there's a connection between your emotional and physical well-being. So we cook with them. And then that kind of wraps up the day. And a lot of our girls are spending a lot of time with us, sometimes more so than their family members. So we kind of sit and eat together with them and kind of like simulate a family environment to kind of teach them ways to communicate with each other when they go back into the home. So that's kind of how the day runs. Then Saturday actually is an important day to note. Saturday is our family day when the girls come in with their family members, and that's where we kind of work on the family dynamics and the family functioning to enhance communication.
Okay, so speaking of wellness, Cynthia, you are the founder and director of the Latina Wellness Network.
Yes.
How important is wellness, and why did you start this network?
It's absolutely critical. I mean, one of the reasons I started this network was because in my experience, what I found, and I often worked with young women in schools and also in their families in private practice, is that there was often a disconnection between overall well-being and a sense that people just didn't know what to do to get better. And they had a real desire to do so, and it wasn't lack of motivation. It was more about a feeling of, I just don't know what tools to use and I don't know what steps to take. And so part of what I've done with Latina Wellness Network is try to bring providers and other Latina practitioners together to really help start facilitate the tools that we can all use to help us feel better. You know, one of the obstacles we often experience in the Latino community is a barrier to treatment around mental health. You know, there's stigmas around it. So if we can start to remove some of the stigmas and educate people, and also just educate them in a way that's about just general well-being. I mean, Life is Precious is a wonderful program because it does that. It looks at the whole person. It looks at the family system. That's really critical when you think about young women that are coming to us. If we don't have a connection to their families and try to start to work in a way that's helpful and uplifting to the entire family, often these young women will make great changes for themselves, but then they have to go back into a home environment that's very demoralizing or depleting of the work that they've already accomplished. So my idea behind Latina Wellness Network was to bring us all together so we can have these discussions, so we can start to educate, so that we can start to remove the stigma and really look at wellness as opposed to deficit, because a lot of the stigma around mental health is that you're somehow deficient and wrong. And so now we're talking about looking at this as, what are our strengths? What can we build? What's positive about us that we can then utilize to move forward and get healthier?
Dr. Gil, I just want to give the viewer sort of an overview of what the CDC reports as 72% of all deaths among youth ages 10 to 24 stem from 4 causes: motor vehicle crashes, other unintentional injuries, homicide at 16%, and then suicide at 13%. So it is alarming that even though suicide is the 4th ranked reason for suicide, for death among youth, that the Latinas take a disproportionate percentage of that segment. What is it about the Latino community that distinguishes this particular issue?
Well, you know, there are several factors, Taina. One of that is the issue of immigration. We are a young community, in a way, in the country, and here we have immigrated. Some of the youth, especially Latina adolescents, or either they were born in another country and they have come and settled here, or they have been born here but their parents are from one of the Latin American countries, Caribbean countries. And immigration, by the way, I should say that when we look at the data, the scientific data for Central, South, and the Caribbean area, there's no high incidence of suicide among the adolescents in those countries. So if they're coming from those countries and that's not a problem there, then one have to raise the question, what is causing this? And the researchers and us practitioners, we believe that immigration is an intervening variable here, because what happened to all of us is that we have to go then through the process of acculturation. And acculturation means that you have to begin to learn to adapt to a different culture that has different ways of values, different ways of behaving. And the adolescents and the youth find themselves between two worlds. The parents, their mothers, they acculturate much less and at a lower rate. And the adolescents, because they go to school and it's faster, they become more attuned to the American values and the behaviors of their peers. So what happened in the home is that the youth, the Latino youth, want to imitate their peers. In the case of the girls, you know, they want to go out with boyfriends and stay late. And the mother said, hey, wait a minute now, you know, when I was growing up in Dominican Republic or El Salvador, we didn't do that. So then there are beginning clashes around autonomy and independence. And I should say that in the American society, the values of this culture is toward more independence and autonomy. While our culture, you know, a girl's supposed to be more dependent, less independent, depending on the family and the parents. So there's a clash here about what is acceptable, what is the belief system. So, and we know, because the researchers have found that when you are in this country for 13 years, that then the behaviors of the problems become much more worse. For example, we know among the Mexican youth and other youth in the country that after the 13 years, the boys tend to have behaviors which are self-destructive, which is they get involved in gangs or they get involved with drugs. And the girls get then depressed, there's feeling of depression, and is the acting out against themselves. So here you have the youth in the Latino community, the boys, because we know that the way that we raise our boys are to be more independent, more aggressive, so to speak. So they go into a self-destructive pattern, which is the ones that I have alluded before. Aside from the issues of the family, the acculturation, we really need to look at the contribution of the environment, as you mentioned before. We at Comunlife did the qualitative marketing research in 2007, where the mothers, and this research was just to understand better from the community perspective, why are we having these problems? Why do mothers think that her girl is thinking of suicide? And they told us that, for example, they don't feel that the schools here in New York City are helpful to them or their daughters. They also told us in the research that they don't think that the mental health clinics are helpful to them or to their daughters because they feel that they do not understand their culture, they don't speak the language. For example, I have worked with mothers who have said to me, I got a call from the school and, there was a lot of complaints about the academic performance or the behavior, and I felt very ashamed. I came to this country to give my daughter the opportunity to do better. So I felt very angry, very upset, and the school system didn't even have a clue how I felt or the struggles that I go through. So those are some of the beginning issues that we know are contributing to this phenomena, aside from the fact that, regretfully, our community lives in poverty. Those are very huge stressors. We know because of the Life is Precious program that we run that the majority of these adolescents are living in homes where is one single parent family, and that is the mother. And she may work 2 jobs to be able to make something for her and her kids, and that leads to isolation of the adolescents, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle for these mothers.
Mm-hmm. So the Latino community is obviously very large, very diverse. Are there any subgroups among the Latino communities that are predominantly at risk? Have you noticed whether there's one population over another?
We've encountered, actually, we have girls that are from Mexico, from Ecuador, from Honduras, from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic. So really it's happening throughout the Latino population. And what we see, like we do see a little bit of an increase in our Mexican population, and but again, it's kind of broad.
Mm-hmm. And can you, Cynthia, can you tell me a little bit about, give me a success story of how a Latina Wellness Network has assisted either a family or a girl into feeling better about herself?
Yeah, I recently treated a young woman who had a mood disorder and had gone to her parents, actually her mother, repeatedly complaining of feeling depressed. And her mother actually kind of ignored it for quite some time. She attributed it to just her being a teenager and just feeling, like she was just going through growing pains, is what she called it. And this young woman was just crying out for help. She kept saying, I really need to see somebody. And finally, her mother brought her in, and I worked with her for about a year, and it was such a shift in her to see her be able to articulate what was going on for her. And a lot of it was that she didn't feel validated by her own family. She felt a lot of what she was going through was not being listened to, that it was minimized, that it wasn't important to them. And a lot of the work I had to do with her and the family was to really have them hear her, have her be able to really communicate what she needed and wanted, and not that she would always get her way because she was still an adolescent and had to live in her parents' home, but that there was at least some discussion about it, which was very empowering for her because for a long time she just had no voice. And when you have no voice, you feel unimportant. Your self-esteem is very low. You feel like you don't matter. And it was really a matter of helping her and the family to know that she was important, that what she felt was important, and it was going to be heard. And so we worked a lot around that, and we worked a lot around helping her change her perspective and her thinking patterns. All of the neuroscience now is pointing to the fact that we have an opportunity, unlike what we thought before, to actually change the way our neurotransmitters respond to information, to emotions. And so a lot of that is actual training that we can do, like it's positive psychology interventions. Like what is good in my life? So these are some of the, I used to make her make lists of things that were good in her life, gratitude lists, helping her to increase her ability to socialize, to have social connections with people outside of her home, with her family support in a way that was acceptable to her family, because there are a lot of stigmas about how Latino youth, Latinas especially, should be associating with their peers. But it also gave her an opportunity to be outside and to make connections with people. That's incredibly important in helping to lift people's mood, to have those social connections that are positive. So we did work like that for about a year, and she really made tremendous improvement, and her family made tremendous improvement. And I believe what I helped them do was just have the tools that they need to kind of move forward. We never work from a place of you, a family, are also the expert. And so what we have to look at is how can we empower families to realize that they have the ability to make these changes and not feel stuck where they're at or feel helpless.
Mm-hmm. But I do want to break it down a little, because suicide is a national public health issue. The Time magazine had a cover a few weeks ago about one a day of military service individuals who come back and commit suicide at a rapid rate. In terms of vulnerable children, we have children who are bullied who attempt suicide, boys who are non-conforming. In the Southeast Asian community, there are plenty of girls who also attempt or commit suicide because of forced marriage or early marriage or non-conforming with their family's tradition. So why, again, what is it about the Latino community that has almost, I don't want to say a monopoly, but really, again, a disproportionate percentage of this horrible public health issue? Is it because there are more Latinos in this country? Is it because there are activists like yourselves who are a lot more aware of their communities and have access to change? I mean, what is it, again, that is so particular about this in the Latino community?
Well, many times when I have been asked to comment on this tragic phenomena, why is it that the Asian community, let me backtrack, the Asian community, the 209 CDC Center chose that in the Asian community, women who are 65 and older have the highest rate of suicide compared to African American, white, and Latina women. So here we have a community of immigrants that the phenomenon seems to be later on in the life of women. While in the Latino community, again, the 209 CDC data shows that Latina adolescents have the highest rate of suicide ideation and suicide attempt. So that data began to resonate with me and trying to find out, well, why is it that we have to immigrants community, we see the phenomenon of suicide in the different developmental stages of women. And in looking or talking to colleagues and researchers about this, one of the data that comes up is the Asian community in this country have one of the highest rate of intact families, while the Latino community is on the opposite side, which is many more single parents family in the Latino community. And I think just talking about the youth and Latino adolescents themselves, that I think that the fact that there's no two parents in the family, that there's a tremendous amount of brunt and hard work on the life of the mothers, aside from the acculturation, because Asian American also experience acculturation. But there seems to be that phenomena of the impact of having one parent or two parents. But aside from that, I think that researchers continue to comment that the specific dynamics of the family in the Latino culture seems to be different from other ethnic groups and racial groups. That the Latino community, the familismo, which is a very powerful value system, seems to have a play in the suicide phenomena that we're seeing in the Latino community. We hear, for example, we see the research that in the Asian community, there is a tremendous emphasis on education and thriving, and the whole how do you make sure that the kids do their homework and how important education is. I'm not suggesting that in the Latino community there's not that interest or concern on the parents' side, but I think that there are environmental issues such as having one person being the breadwinner that creates additional challenges here for the Latino community. All the researchers in the country seems to be pointing out to family dynamics in the Latino community, and also the issue of immigration and acculturation as a contributing factor to the phenomena of suicide ideation and suicide attempts. But you know, this leads me to something else that you mentioned before. In a way, this is not a new phenomena. We have known since 1995 that Latino adolescents have that this is really a mental health disparity. And then one needs to look at policymakers, at government. If we have known that there seems to be this disparity in the Latino community, what is it that we can do to prevent this? Is it that we need to do more programs like Life is Precious, where we involve the families on Saturday, you know, to echo what Beatriz was talking about? I think that Life is Precious, in a way, we become cultural brokers between the families and the adolescents. We try to explain to the adolescents, look, your mother is being so tough and so demanding, and she doesn't want you to do this and that, because when she grew up in a different environment. And we try to explain to them perhaps what will it be like growing up in Santo Domingo or in El Salvador or Mexico. And then we do that type of work with the mothers too. We try to explain to them, look, you know, you wanted to come to this country to improve the life of your children. And this is a different country with different values. And we try to help them to understand or try to diminish or to reduce those clashes. Because at the end of the day, you know, familismo in the Latino culture, what it means is you will do anything to help a family member. So we appeal to that, to the mothers, and say, you know, we're here to help you. And also, Ms. Santiago was talking about the same concept of reaching out to the families and say, you can change this, you can improve the life of the family.
We can't, and this is a question for both of you, we can't really talk about the Latino community without talking about the Catholic Church and its role in the family. And we know that suicide is a sin, and plenty of other things are sins, especially in the lives of very young girls and mothers. So how do you reconcile, speaking of culturation, like how do you reconcile the two in talking? And I know you are a priestess as well, and you're a Orisha tradition. So can you tell me a little bit about how religion plays, if at all, it plays a role in Life is Precious?
So for some of our girls it does, where parents are Catholic. What we try, and like Dr. Gil was saying, is that with the whole familismo thing, that it's more of an interdependency, where the American culture is more independent. So what we try and do is incorporate the family values as well. So if a family is Catholic, then we don't take away from that. The youth that we see that we work with are not really religious. So what we try, and like Dr. Gil said, is kind of mediate between the two and try and educate, psychoeducate the parents that while religion is an important value to have and we completely respect it, we also have to deal with something more concrete and tangible when we're dealing with the children and the youth. So kind of like teaching them other methods of coping. Basically what we do is also teach them coping skills. So what are other avenues and forums that we can bring in that we can help address what's going on? And the more that we have, the better. The more elements that we can bring in, the more effective treatment will be. So we don't take away from it. If that's a family value, then we incorporate it in the treatment as well.
Mm-hmm. And do you have anything?
Yeah, similarly, we don't ever want to take away people's value system. It's their value system, it's their belief system. But we do look at what I do in my work is often look at ways of how we can use it to help strengthen as opposed to weaken. I think part of the issue that comes up in Catholicism is that there's often a great deal of guilt tied to action, right? So here you have this young woman who's now in America already struggling with this conflict with her family around their values and her values. And then on top of it, she's got what they call good old Catholic guilt, right? So she's taken some actions that would clearly be outside of the religious belief of Catholicism. And so you don't want to, you don't want to ever take away a family's value system, as I said, but you do want to help her look at what's best for her, and what fits for her life. And there's certain things that I often tell people, and when I'm in therapy, we're in practice together, is I say, there's some value in something you've learned in that. What's the value you can take away? The rest you can leave behind. You don't have to take it all with you. That's always the perspective in life. These are the things that are working for me, that will be good for me. The rest I'm just going to kind of put to the side. It's not working too well. And often that guilt doesn't work well for any kind of healing. So what we have to do is work on those feelings and then think about ways to enforce other attributes that are going to help a young woman and her family move forward. We never want to judge people's religion or tell them it's wrong, because that's wrong. But we do want to help them look at how it might in some way be hindering or adding to a problem, that's just not useful for helping a young woman heal and get better.
So this is a question for all three of you. We've been talking a lot about the individual adolescent, but within her community, we know that we live in a patriarchal society. There's a lot of violence against women. 1 in 4 girls in the world will be subjected to either incest or sexual assault before she turns 18. We know that Latina teens have a rate of pregnancy that is 3 times higher than any of her counterparts. How does that play, the violence against girls, the sexual violence, the physical violence, emotional violence, how does that play in your work?
Well, the data that we have on the participants of Life is Precious, and we started this program in 2008, so we have 4 years of trying to help these adolescents. 45% of the girls who have participated in the program have experienced sexual abuse or physical abuse. So we already have an indicator there that is really troublesome. In addition to that, we know that 35% of the girls in the program, they have had some history in the family of suicide. And I look at suicide like an act of violence against oneself. So we know that this is a challenge, that this is a problem that creates more of a feeling of depression in the girls. As to whether that's a direct causation to the suicide ideation and suicide attempt, that has not been established by researchers. but we do know that that has to be a contributing factor. But your point that you mentioned before, the teenage pregnancy in the Latino community, which has a very high rate, we have a high rate of teen pregnancy in the Latino community. In 2007, when we did the qualitative research in the Bronx, and we asked the participants on the research, the girls, what do you think may be contributing to your friends or your peers having thoughts about killing themselves or actually attempting to kill themselves? And it was very interesting, Taina. The younger adolescents, 11, 12, they pointed out that maybe their peer, their friends, may think of suicide because of their fear of getting pregnant. So we saw there a little bit of a connection. Interesting enough, our research shows that the older adolescents, those 16, 17, when we asked the question, they said, well, our peers, our friends, may think of suicide because of the violence, because of the gangs, because of the bullying in the school. So there seems to be some relationships here that may impact on the decision, on the thinking about suicide, on thinking how to do it, and then, attempting suicide. So your question is very important and very relevant, because I think that what happens in our communities, quite frankly, is that I do believe that the incidence of sexual abuse and physical abuse is much higher than what we know, what has been documented in the literature. And the reason what I think so is because we have this whole concept of familismo, which is a very good, there's a lot of strength there, but also there's another side to that, which is I would never go to the police to complain that my husband beat the hell out of me, because that's against, some of the family norms. So we need to do a better job in supporting those women who are in those situations, to helping them to move to a situation where there's no violence in their life.
How easy, Beatriz, have you encountered any girls who come to you and have the nerve, so to speak, or the courage to talk about violence in the home?
Definitely. We even, like Dr. Gil was saying, we have a high percentage of girls that have been sexually abused, raped. There's physical violence in the home, domestic violence. And part of what we do, as well as we have outside sister agencies come and give workshops. For example, the Office to Combat Domestic Violence has this peer mentor program where they come into the programs and offer like 6-week workshops. And oftentimes this is where experiences come out even more. Part of what we find as well is that because we have a group environment, it's easier for them to relate to others, and therefore it opens up a forum for them to communicate experiences that they have had. So we see it a lot, we see it often. So we try and do, as I was saying earlier, creative arts therapy is really important. Sometimes girls won't say that, but even through their artwork, our art therapists are trained to see certain things in that art that indicate that they've been sexually abused, which has happened in a couple of cases where we've then been able to have a discussion with the girls, and information has come out that they have, in fact, been abused. So the numbers are high, and like Dr. Gil said, I think it's even higher because sometimes they don't relate that information right away. They have to build a trust. So that's another important aspect, building trust and a connection with them so that they can open up. The advantage that we have in our program is that we spend so much time with them, like I said, even more so than with their family members, that we're able to build that connection that sometimes they don't even get to build with a therapist that they may see once a week. So that's why the connection with the therapist is important, that we can relay information that they can then process individually as well. But we see it a lot.
Yeah, so Cynthia, obviously you are in the business of making people feel better and be more empowered. We know that violence, especially in childhood, takes a lifetime to recover from. So what and you or Latina Wellness Network may not be in these young girls' lives and subsequently women's lives forever. So what tools can you give these very vulnerable individuals to get stronger for the journey of life?
Well, I think, the first thing that we always have to do is help ensure that they know it's not their fault. I mean, so many young women will take on this feeling of that they somehow did something to invite this into their life, or sometimes even because of the cultural norms that they were dressed a certain way, or they were out with their friends, and somehow because they were violated, if they had stayed home or if they hadn't been dressed that way, those things wouldn't have happened to them. And so they're carrying around this extra burden on top of the act of violence, of feeling that they somehow did this to themselves. And so one of the first things we always want to do is look at ways to ensure that they know that this was something that was done to them, not something they brought onto themselves. And so, again, looking at tools that will help empower them, because what happens with an act of violence is there's immediately a sense of disempowerment, a sense of helplessness. And so what I want to do primarily is help them find ways to empower themselves again. And that's looking at all aspects of their life, really. It's looking at, am I doing things to take care of myself? Am I nurturing myself? Am I connecting with people that are important to me, that support me, and that can hear me when I need to talk? A lot of the problem is that people go into isolation when these things happen. They don't want to reach out. They're ashamed. And so let's take away the shame. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Let's help you connect to people that are going to nurture you and support you. Again, removing the stigmas of mental health and trying to get people into treatment. I mean, that's so critical for young women. Sometimes it does take therapy and a little bit of medication for a little while. There's so much stigma around the medication, and it's not something that we, generally want. It's not the first move we want to make when treating somebody, but sometimes it is a bridge to help stabilize a mood until you can get to a better place internally to work on your issues. So looking at ways that will help educate as well, There's something to be said about knowing that this is not just something that happened to you, but that it happens across the world. And this wasn't somehow an individual act against just you as a person, And then the other thing is really looking at ways to help women find ways to find their self-esteem again. I think Life is Precious Creative Arts Program is one of the best things that we can help young women do. Connecting ways to get the emotions out, but they don't necessarily have to talk about them. Young people are not necessarily prone to having these big, long conversations with adults. So how do we get them to articulate these feelings in another way that helps release, so that all of this is not internalized? That's the biggest thing. Depression, suicide, all of that's related to this internalization and what Dr. Gil referred to as this act of violence against oneself. So we'll see young men go out and act violently against others, but young women will internalize their violence and act against themselves. And so we want to have ways to help get some of that out of them so that they're not internalizing it all. And just looking at ways to connect them to community. I mean, again, I just love Life is Precious because that's one of the things they do. They create community. Community is critical in this. The more that we can connect young women to community with their peers, but also with caring adults and building relationship for them, then we are moving in the right direction to helping alleviate and giving them lifelong tools. That's a lifelong tool to know how to connect to somebody, to know how to seek help, to know how to access community.
So speaking of community, we're focusing here in New York City, but obviously this is a phenomenon across the United States. So I have a two-pronged question about moving forward and finding solutions. One, have you built or are you building coalitions with other similar groups in the country who are working on this issue? And two, is there a role for government here to raise awareness about the issue, address the issue, help fund programs like yours and others?
You know, just last week I was in Santiago presenting the challenge for Latin adolescents and suicide, and then talking about the Life is Precious program. And this was a conference sponsored by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Agency of the federal government. So I had the opportunity to talk to other providers of services throughout the country. And one of the things that became very obvious to me that this is almost, although we have the statistics, this is something like is a neglected issue. Mm-hmm. Even providers are not aware of the CDC data. I have have relationships in Florida, and reach out to that community in the Midwest and in the West Coast. But I think that yet we have not really get all together and say, we collectively, as a community, we need to do something about this, because this is not going away. I think, on the contrary, is getting worse. So perhaps, Taina, there's a little bit of hope of building more coalition building, throughout the country. I should say, that each community for the Latino youth is a little bit different. When we look at the 2009 data from the CDC, we saw that Los Angeles, the highest rate of suicide ideation and suicide attempts is among Latino boys, not girls, which is a completely very different data for New York City, which in 2009, that data suggested that we have become the epicenter of the epidemic here. So in working with, talking to my Latino counterparts in Los Angeles, we were talking about the fact that programs like this can be replicated not only for the girls, but what is it that we're doing with the boys in Los Angeles to prevent suicide? And one of my colleagues from Los Angeles was talking about that there are so many gangs in Los Angeles that perhaps that is an explanation or a cause, a contributing factor to that phenomena. But there's much more room to be done, much more discussions to create that coalition that you're suggesting. In terms of government, quite frankly, this is an issue that government has neglected at the federal level, at the state level, and at the city level. Although I have to say that since 2008 that we have, for example, we, Comunlife, asked to have a public hearing of the New York State Assembly Mental Health Committee at the end of 2007, and the same thing for the City Council. Just a year ago, we had a public hearing at the City Council to address the issue of Latina adolescents. So the City Council has become more involved, the Assembly has become more involved, but we are far from getting a response from government to address this issue. Even, for example, Comunlife doesn't get really funding from the state mental health authority or the city authority to provide services in the Life is Precious program. And I was at a public hearing where the Executive Deputy Commissioner for the City of New York, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, was testifying, and he mentioned the fact that the rate of complete suicide are not as high for the Latina adolescents. That what we see is a lot of ideations and attempts. And the concern is, but what is it that we're waiting for?
I know. Should be good news.
The concern is that we should not wait for that. That we should have more programs like this. We are very fortunate of the support of Congresswoman Velasquez, who was the one who opened up the office in Brooklyn. And we hope to get more support from the corporate and the government and to continue to do what we're doing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah, lots of work to be done, and hopefully this program and more advocacy will gain more attention and certainly more funds, hopefully.
And if I may say,
yes.
And your job, because every time that, like yourself, are bringing this to the viewers, that's public education, public awareness, and public education about a topic that is so important. So we really thank you for what you're doing here today in bringing this to the viewer to collectively do something about this.
Thank you. It's my honor. We have to remember that every human being matters, and sometimes we don't remember that in our community. So, do you have a success story, Beatriz?
Yes. One thing I did want to share that in avenues that we try and help these girls express themselves. Right now we collaborated with El Museo del Barrio, and what they did is they provided us with an artist educator for 8 weeks who came into our Bronx site and worked with the girls, and the outcome of that was an exhibition of their artwork. So I invite the viewers who are watching this to please go and check it out. The youth exhibition is called Out Loud, and our agency was one of the 10 that are part of this organization, and the girls actually were really into it and produce some really nice artwork. But for example, just the other day, we're thinking of starting a music program, Dr. Gil is, and through one of her friends, we went, Andres Levine, we went to his music studio, recording studio in Union Square, and one of our girls was severely bullied, and it's hard for her to trust, open up, express herself, so she's always writing. So we took her to the studio. It was about 20 girls. We went to the studio, and Andres asked her to go into the booth and do her song, and she went in there and she did a rap about being bullied. So that's a success story to us, because these are girls that through this program are now able to express themselves, and when we get them to express themselves outwardly, then it helps. They don't internalize it, and that reduces the self-injurious behavior or the suicidal ideation. It decreases the depression, increases their self-esteem. That's one example through the arts. Another one of our girls in the Brooklyn site, she was suffering from severe social anxiety and depression, and when she first started with us, this was a young lady who completely isolated and had chronic absences and was in danger of not graduating because she just couldn't cope. So through our program, since she wasn't going to school, then we would ask her to come spend time with us during the day, and we would do simple activities, exercises with her, like walk around the block, get her to engage, get her to, eye contact with others. And she graduated from high school, and she's our first to start college. So that's like one that we really talk about a lot, because it made a difference. If this program wouldn't have been around, she would have been a high school dropout, she would have continued to isolate, and her future would have been bleak. So.
Well, congratulations! Those are great stories, and then they become leaders themselves in their community.
They become mentors. So what we do is, once they graduate from our program, they turn into peer mentors, where they come back and now they help other girls in the program.
Cynthia, Beatriz and I were talking before the show about the role of the internet and social media, and how actually it can aggravate the loneliness, the isolation, the lack of community, face-to-face community, but obviously it also has benefits to it. So how do you balance that in your work? And we only have a few minutes left. But.
Well, really, I'm glad you brought this up, because I think it's critical. And one of the ways I think we can balance this is by actually using the community as a way to educate. That's one of the things I do at Latina Wellness Network. I keep a blog site, and I'm constantly talking about ways to feel better. I call it empowering and inspiring Latinas to happiness, because that's critical. And we can use social media in that way. I actually will put out a call now. I was sitting here thinking about it. Like, I want to go back and call on my fellow Latina bloggers to really start talking about this issue and what resources are out there for young women. So that's one way we can have the balance. But this is critical too, and I keep talking, we have to make social connection. We cannot substitute computers for interaction with other human beings. It's so critical. It's who we are. We're human beings, we're social beings, and if we can encourage each other to walk away from the computer and go have a cup of coffee with your friend, or make a phone call instead of sitting at a computer, or, you know, Facebook is a wonderful thing because it connected us to people we lost in the past. But it is not the only way to connect with people. It's not the real substance of how you connect. So finding that balance is really critical.
So Dr. Gil, what is your hope for the future and in helping Latinas?
My hope is that we all will respond to this cry from these adolescents, and that myself and others, yourself and the community at large, then we first become aware that this is a serious problem and that we really need to do something about it. You know, whether it is perhaps, and Cynthia mentioned this before, you know, role modeling. We need women who have struggled like these adolescents have struggled, that could, you know, be a constant person in the life of these, not only our adolescents, but others that we see in the community. So what it is we need to really rally people around this issue. I know that communities rally around other issues, so we need to create the conscious and just become pretty much involved in how to fight this epidemic in New York City.
And fighters we are. Any final word in 30 seconds to each, Beatriz and Cynthia? Words for our viewers, like to rally. Go ahead.
For those viewers, I hope that you can join us in fighting this epidemic of suicide among Latina adolescents. And if you need help, Comunlife is here to help you and to support you. And you can call us at 212-219-1618, and we will try to do the best to support you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rosa Gil, Cynthia Santiago, and
I just want to
Beatriz
invite them to
Coronel.
check our website out, because we do have a corporate breakfast that we do every year, and fundraising is really important to keep this program alive. So please check out our website, and we have a fundraiser in October.
Thank you so much. So this concludes our special edition for today. If you'd like to continue this conversation, please contact us at the emails below, including lifeisprecious@communitylife.org and latinawellnessnetwork.com. Until next time, this is Taina Bien-Aime from 28 Minutes, Issues That Matter to New York City and to the World. Thank you for joining us.